when Julie Adler unearths the corpse of a famous actress from the 30s in her family's theater. What was previously thought of as a disappearance is revealed to be a murder, with the board of directors trying to push her out and the theater's reputation on the line. She looks to you to discover the truth about this cold case investigation. Sounds pretty cool, huh? Hunt a Killer is the perfect gift for the person you don't know who to shop for. It's not some trinket they won't use, but something that they'll get to experience and participate in. With each delivery, you'll sift through piles of documents, evidence, audio recordings, and case files, eliminating suspects and identifying murder weapons until you crack the case and catch the killer. It's like an escape room delivered right to your door. Hunt a Killer isn't just about solving a murder. It's also an ongoing narrative, and part of the proceeds for every box goes to the Cold Case Foundation, an organization that is dedicated to helping with real-life cold cases. For me, personally, I enjoy Hunt a Killer because I'm not a super big fan of true crime. I'm more of a fan of fiction, and both of these things marry together incredibly well. I mean, plus the fact that part of the proceeds for every case goes to the Cold Case Foundation is pretty nice. So right now, you can go over to huntakiller.com/creepypasta and use code Creepypasta for a 20% off discount. Again, make sure you use code Creepypasta for a 20% off discount. I know I see a lot of you say you can survive a creepypasta, but do you have what it takes to hunt a killer? It was all I could do not to vomit when my mother-in-law proudly set the roast down in front of us, its meat glistening brown on the kitchen table. "Doug, are you all right?" my wife Maxine whispered, making sure her parents couldn't hear. She hadn't told them what I'd been through. And hell, I'd hardly had the mental strength to tell her everything myself. The smell of the freshly roasted meat created an acrid taste in the back of my mouth. Ever since I was a kid, I've been obsessed with experimentation. Scientific constants, variables, and results fascinated me. When other guys my age were mastering unhooking a bra with one hand, I was pouring salt on snails and making semi-poisonous toxins with my chemistry set. Before I had time to process, I'd signed the NDA, given over my bank account information to payroll, and I'd signed off my first official contract with the scientific world as an intern. The feeling of knowing I would be welcomed into a community of peers that were into the same interests that I was. My mind raced the possibilities of what my employer and I would discover together. The ways we would change the world as we knew it. If only I had known. When I walked in that first day, I was ready to take the world of science and medicine by the balls. The man who'd hired me, he would be the one I would be working under. He told me nothing about himself, other than that his name was Harris. Whether that was his first or last name, I had no idea. I didn't care much to ask at the time. Then again, I didn't think it was the information that would be too relevant during an internship. People don't like an overabundance of questions, whether they admit it to you or not, and I didn't want to be the squeaky wheel that got boiled in hot grease. Anyway, science is one of the broadest subjects that there is, and I knew I could have signed up to study any one of them. Being a student with military upbringing, I won't lie and tell you I wasn't hoping for something biochemical, or at the very least, weather-related. Having said that, when Harris told me that we'd be studying behavioral science, I was more than intrigued. The science of the mind hadn't even occurred to me as a possibility. With my family's various mental illnesses and addictions, I thought it'd be a wonderful area to study and understand. Excuse me, Harris? I said quietly. Will we be studying serotonin levels and the effects of different chemicals in the brain? A thin smile stretched across his weathered face as he turned to acknowledge me. That, my good sir, is more psychological science, and what we do here is different. You'd be hard-pressed to find results like these in Rorschach tests or blood panels. He began to walk down a hallway to the left, wordlessly motioning for me to follow as he continued to speak. You are here to learn, not to judge. Many aspiring scientists shy away from the greatness. They let their moral compass get in the way. Is that going to be an issue, Doug? I more than disliked the implications of his tone, but I answered nonetheless. Of course. Whatever you need, sir. Harris! He barked. correcting a politeness that any other of my superiors would have appreciated. Harris then cleared his throat before addressing me in a softer voice. Everyone here is perfectly aware of why they're here. They get compensation in the name of science. Now, who wouldn't want that? He smiled, resembling the old-timey snake oil salesman. I merely nodded in response. We entered a dark room that contained a long table and chairs, a plane of glass that took up the entire front wall, fully revealing the room behind it. The two women in nurses' scrubs sat in the bare, stark white room. There was nothing for them to sit on or lean against. It was just the two women, the floor, and a vast sea of maddening white. I stared at Harris, confused. Don't worry. They can't see or hear us, he said matter-of-factly. They looked bored and tired, but otherwise healthy. The complacency of their movements and facial expressions proved what Harris had said earlier was true. These women were definitely here of their own volition. We watched in silence for a full hour before Harris spoke again, shedding a very dim light on the point of the experiment. These ladies here are vegetarian. Our job is to see how dedicated they are to their cause by testing their willpower and defenses. The first one to give in to their hunger goes home with nothing. The woman who holds out the longest will receive a quarter of the money gathered for this research study. $10,800. More silence continued, with even less activity coming from the inside. The taller woman with the dark hair seemed perfectly content with sitting idle and doing nothing. I surmised maybe she was a housewife or a stay-at-home mom and desperately needed an empty space to herself, mostly. However, the shorter woman in the red hair became fidgety after only 6 hours. She began twisting her hair at the ends before ripping it off, chewing her fingernails and tapping her feet. I guessed she was a smoker, someone who depended on an oral fixation. I felt relieved at the end of the day when I got to go home. The plan was to go home and cook up the fattest, juiciest steak that I had had in the freezer. I assumed the women were released also, and were satiating their hunger with salads, veggie wraps, or whatever the hell it was that they preferred to eat. I was wrong. The next afternoon, I was surprised to see the women in the same clothing they were in the day before. Their hair was disheveled, and dark bags were beginning to plague the skin under their eyes. Jesus Christ, didn't they go home and eat? I asked incredulously. My lower lip clamped under my top teeth the moment the inquiry came into the open, audible air. Instead of snapping at me, I was surprised to see a smile on Harris's normal, joyless face. I figured you'd ask. That's why I wanted you to be here when I fed them. My heart dropped as I saw him reach into a plastic container and pull out a raw hunk of fat, marbled beef, much like the one I selfishly grilled up and enjoyed the evening before. He sprinkled what looked like a mixture of pepper and rosemary before sliding it into the room on a tray. Both women looked at it disgustingly as it entered their shared space. I saw them murmuring things to each other, but couldn't hear inside of the room. You can't be serious, I exclaimed, much louder than I meant to. Harris shot me a steely look of warning as he withdrew the empty tray from the slot, closed the entrance to it, and locked it. I cringed as the taller woman dropped her pants and started urinating in the corner. Similar stains began to catch my eye the more I glanced around the room. The red-haired woman had reduced her nails to bloodied shards, but still winced as she attempted to bite off more. Her swollen fingertips twisted off brittle bits of greasy hair. Harris grabbed the phone, clicked on a button, and leaned towards the opposite side of the room before whispering something that I couldn't understand. As he did this, I realized that the red-haired woman wasn't trying to chew her nails at all. Instead, I noticed she was taking the ripped balls of hair, placing them between her teeth to chew on. Two men walked into the white room with assertive steps. Everything inside of me screamed that I should have said something, anything, to try and stop what was going on in front of me, but of course I didn't. In my mind, it was all justified. They signed on for this. No one was forcing them to be here. The men grabbed the red-haired woman by the shoulders before forcing her to her knees. A single tear slid down her face as one of the men withdrew a pair of scissors from his inner coat pocket. The other produced what looked like a beard and mustache trimmer. Within moments, the beautiful curls of red hair were nothing more than stolen wisps. On the floor, dying more by the second. The women looked at each other as the clippers turned on, the blonde giving the other a nod of encouragement and solidarity. The room was swept and vacuumed before the pair left the same way they had come in. You know what? This whole thing would be a hell of a lot easier if I just gave them names. So, I decided to call the taller blonde woman Barbara and the other Rebecca. I wasn't privy to their real names, but it felt disrespectful to label them as subjects. Subjects A and B, same way that Harris had in the past statement. The stake still sat between them, and I gagged to see some of the rust-red hairs from Rebecca's head stuck to its flesh. Oxidation had begun to set in the corners, slowly turning the once crimson meat to a dull, rotted brown. I couldn't help wondering which one of them would crack first, or how long they'd have to stay if neither one did. After 2 days off, I almost didn't go back, but Harris's words plagued me each time that I thought about it. Many aspiring scientists shy away from greatness. They let their moral compass get in the way. Is that going to be an issue, Doug? So after much mental realizations and justifications, I showed up bright and early Monday morning as promised. In my mind, I knew there was no way that the women would still be there. Surely one of them pulled a fear factor and bit off a chunk of meat by now. But as for the theme of the story, of course, I was wrong. Their once bright room was now becoming dingy under the pristine lights. Brown smears adorned the back of their clothes, excrement that had made it past the self-made defecation corner. As off-point as it was, I remember wondering how one could shit so much with virtually nothing in their stomachs. Barbara lay sleeping in the fetal position on the floor, surely weakened from the lack of nutrition and hydration. $11,000 had the potential to be a life-changing amount of money. But was it really worth all this? I thought sadly. Rebecca crawled weakly to the front of the room, sniffing the steak before dribbling bile down her chin. I gagged a little myself once I saw the pieces of meat were now tinged to sea algae green, with gray marbling swirling through it where the fat once was. I bit my lip as she lifted the meat up to her face. I couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief as she tossed it away. And then I saw something that scared me. Rebecca looked at Barbara. A wild look that had taken over her face. She was studying her, eyeing her. I'd heard a lot of my friends rudely refer to girls as pieces of meat, but this was the first time I'd ever seen that saying personified on someone's face. Now, what I said earlier about the NDA, I realize this entire thing, it was a direct defiance of that order. You see, if legal ramifications fall upon me after this, I welcome them with open arms. The truth is, I'd be safer in jail anyway. What happened next shouldn't have been a surprise. This was a behavioral study after all, and people are capable of almost anything when pushed too far, and still, I didn't see it coming. I don't think any of us did. Rebecca made a cooing motion with her lips as she softly stroked Barbara's hair. The woman stirred slightly as Rebecca's shaved head leaned down to kiss her cheek, and in a snap-like motion, she reared her head back and viciously buried in on the corner of Barbara's neck. Her eyes snapped open in surprise as Rebecca sent blood and sinew spewing from her own neck. Rebecca paused only slightly to write something on the floor in Barbara's blood. And by the time anyone had gotten in there, it was too late. Rebecca knew to bite the most lethal part of the body, cutting off her air supply and blood flow instantly. She smiled through flesh-covered teeth, and she continued to eat her way up to her right cheekbone. I snapped my attention back to my mother-in-law's kitchen table, shutting away from the array of meats and vegetables piled high on plates. My mother-in-law was speaking to me, but I'd been too wrapped up in my own horrors to realize it. Go on and eat, Doug, while it's fresh. I wasn't one of the men who busted in the room, the one where the women had been held. I ashamedly stayed behind, frozen in horror like a coward, but when I was questioned, they showed me a picture of what Rebecca had written on the floor. The words, they haunted me to this day. Forever burned into my memory in an emblazoned red font. If you're going to make me eat meat, it has to be fresh. Hey there, kids. Thank you so much for listening to tonight's story, and I wanted to tell you thank you, for listening to me at all. I am actually coming up on doing this for 10 whole years. Come January 4th, I will have been doing YouTube for 10 years. So that's a hell of a thing, man. And honestly, it means nothing without all of you. So thank you for that. Thank you for listening on YouTube or on the podcast. I also want to give a very big thank you shout out to all of you guys out there on Patreon. If you guys want to check out patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, you're able to support the show, support me, support my cats, support, being cool folks out there like people like these. Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Mr. Thud, Ken Lando Higuchi, Chompski, Bobby Karman, Nico Kaeo, Tristain Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, Raven Hart, 1-800-Nightmare, King Hades F13, Unknown Nobody, Joshua Mcmeekin, Michael Scharbrough, Kazan, ThisIsMyRealNameNoShit, Jason VB Wilson, InfernalOne, Lilwulfgaming, JimboTheHutt, Caspian, Jordan Nells, Hades Nephew, Jordan Wayne Deckard, Bradley Leipe, and Charron, AcidSystem, Mike Bullock, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Brian Arse, Cryptic Nightmares, Brianna Wright, Someone You Love, S-Man, Kiri the Sloth, Thomas Burgett, Liam Newman, Sky Harbor, Caleb Dougal, Nina Smith, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. Thank you guys so much for your support on Patreon. I really can't thank you enough. And everybody who's down there in the description, thank you guys so much as well. And everybody who's not on either of those tiers, who just have $1 on Patreon, I can't thank you guys, for making these past 10 years incredible. This entire time I've ever spent on YouTube, on podcasting, everything amazing. And all of you who are at home listening, thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful, happy holidays and sweet dreams.